All right, so here's the deal. If you guys have any specific questions, feel free to shoot them in. In the meanwhile, I'd like to know from you all, what is the most important thing you learned this year? It could be like music related, could be personally, to whatever extent you want to share. I'd be really curious about that. I know this is a time that a lot of people start making New Year's resolutions, but I'm more interested in, what did you get out of this year? What was a big, or not so big, just meaningful aha moment or something that you stumbled across? Interest and aptitude do not necessarily guarantee skill. So that's really interesting. What do you mean by that? You mean like you need a passion involved in the equation? And how did you learn that? Because you're right. There's a big difference between knowledge and application. You can be the smartest. And I've learned this in a lot of different things in my life too, that, intelligence or aptitude doesn't necessarily make things happen. It's getting your fingernails dirty and getting in the foxhole that makes it happen. So if that's where you're coming from, I agree with you 100%. What, if you can share, how did you learn that? How did you come across that lesson? What did you do to learn that? Again, share with me the most important thing you learned this year. Or ask me a question on something else. Yeah. Gary said the most important thing I learned is not to wait until you're older to clear the air in bad relationships. Yeah, man, I agree with you there. I totally. And when like I've forgiven certain people. Thanks, Pedro. You have a great New Year as well. I've forgiven certain people and reached out to people, and the funny thing about that is, a lot of people I've reached out to over the years, because my perception is when I was younger, I was kind of an asshole to them, and like all the people, not one of them remembered it, which was really interesting, which I was very grateful for. But it goes to show you sort of like, no one's going to bed thinking about you, sort of, maybe your spouse or your partner, or whatever, your kids. But, a lot of this stuff is in our own head, but that's why we got to clear it up for our own well-being, So I totally get that. Who was my favorite interview this year? Okay. I get asked versions of that question all the time. Who's my favorite interview? And it honestly, no lie, it's just really hard to tell. But it's like saying, what's your favorite book? If you're a reader, or who's your favorite kid, and that changes, day to day sometimes. But it's really hard because everybody, for the most part, adds me something. I could tell you the worst interviews I had, which I'm not going to tell you, but those come to mind much. That's easy because there's only been a few and they've been real painful. But this year I had a couple of really moving interviews. One of them was with a bass player, a session player, Los Angeles bass player named Al Berry, Berry. And Al's story was incredibly moving. He had a rough childhood, grew up in Philadelphia in the hood, and he had been sexually abused. And this was the whole thing. This is pretty intense. He was sexually abused by a couple of kids in his neighborhood. And he was a scrawny little young kid when this happened, maybe 12, 13 years old. 3, 4 years later, 5 years later, maybe even 6 years later, he's in high school, senior in high school, and his life had totally changed. He was really involved in music. He had worked out. He was, in really good condition at that point in time, was no longer a scrawny little kid. He's on the bus riding to go somewhere from, if you've grown up in a city, you get on the city bus and you just go. One of the guys who sexually molested him gets on the bus and sits down 3 or 4 rows ahead of him. And it was like a heavy moment for him, obviously. And a lot of stuff went through his mind because physically he was at the point in time where he could have literally killed the person. And that's what he was thinking. He said, man, I really want to kill this person. At the same time, I don't know how he had this level of empathy as a youngster, but he recognized in the Black community, this particular kid had, I think the kid's mom was a lesbian. In the Black community, that's not like a cool thing. And it certainly was even more difficult to have then. So he actually had empathy for his, the person who had sexually molested him. And I'll never forget what Al said. He said to me, he said, I wanted to do something, but how can I ever get that stain off of me? And obviously over the years, he's done a lot of work in dealing with this issue. I thought he must have, and he has, we've talked about, and I'm not saying anything that he didn't share on the show, but to have the level of grace and to have the level of emotional, what's the word I'm looking for? Not comfort, emotional acceptance for what happened and to discuss it in that manner. It was just so impressive to me because clearly he has done a ton of work. So if you haven't listened to that interview, it's Al Berry, Berry, session bass player out of Los Angeles. The other one is something I had on recently. His name is Joel Wilkins, and both these guys are on Instagram. Al Berry, I don't know what his handle is. Just look up Al Berry bass player or something like that. But Joel is under JW Restoration. So Joel is a very successful and well-known luthier. And it's funny because I got a hold of him because we've had a lot of clients, mutual clients. Like I've had guys on my show and he's gotten to check him out because he's really busy and, he doesn't take everybody that comes to him. So he's kind of used, do I want to work with this guy or not based on listening to some of the stuff on my show. And he kind of reached out to me and said, hey, I like your interview. I think with Scotty Hill from Skid Row. And we started talking and I recognized he had some passion about music and guitars and I wanted to get him on the show. And I didn't know this at the time, but Joel was in an accident, a motorcycle accident when he was 18 years old, broke his back, and he has been a paraplegic in a wheelchair. I think he's in his 40s now. And we talked about that. And to me, a guy like that is my hero because I never hear this guy bitching about anything. He doesn't complain about anything. He just goes on living life like we all do. He's got good days and bad days like we all do. But I think in this world where people are on social media all the time, pissing and moaning about everything. And I use an example on our interview of there was a guy, a musician, and he was actually bitching and moaning on Facebook at how dare somebody called him or didn't call. He was pissed off basically that he called somebody and they didn't call him back, yet he saw them out doing stuff on Facebook. And I was first of all, I thought that was pathetic. It's none of your business what someone else is doing, number one. Number two, people do what they want to do. I mean, it was just pathetic. I felt it was. And there you got Joel, who's in a wheelchair, who's never complaining about anything, happiest guy. And so that Joel Wilkins, again, it's JW Restoration and on Instagram. Those are my two favorites for the year because they really were bright, shining lights about how to, I'm always interested in people overcoming obstacles and how you did it because I could learn a lot from these people. And I think we all can, and that's one of the beautiful things I love about doing this show. And so Joel Wilkins and Al Berry were my two favorite interviews for this year. And that was a good question. Thanks for asking that. Let me go through some more. Have a great New Year, Pedro. You too. Hello from Tampa. Oh, okay. Biker Geek God. I don't know if you're a gal or a guy, but I'm in Tampa, as you know, too. So, yeah, I have some pretty cool interviews. Let me see if I could. I knew someone was going to ask this. I said I should have a list of these for next year. But let me see. I have if I can grab my book. I'm like old school. Like I have an actual calendar and I have a digital too, but I like to write stuff down because I when I see everything. Okay, so coming up, I have Norm from Norm's Guitars coming on the show, so that should be fun. He's going to be a really interesting guy. I read his book. It's pretty, you know, you look at a guy like him and you see, oh, he's got this store. The amount of work, just like everything we all do, the amount of work that this guy did to making that store a success was phenomenal. And the amount of work he still does to this day. I mean, it's incredible. So that'll be a good one coming up. Sean Bevan, I don't know if you know him. He's a producer and engineer. He's mixed some huge records, 9 Inch Nails, I think Soundgarden. Brown Lawler, he's the guitar player for a really good band called St. Paul and the Broken Bones. They are like Motown. They're like a Motown funk R&B band. They're an incredible band. He's one of the founders, a guitar player. I have Eric Gales coming on the show. That ought to be really good. And I'm really looking forward to that because he's got a great story. I think he's been sober for a few years now, and he's just a phenomenal player. And I hope he's going to explode career-wise. I also, supposedly Beth Hart is supposed to come on. I'm waiting to get the confirm on that. And I have an old band. There was a band when I was a kid called the Connells. I remember I was in Tower Records one day and they're like an alt band. They're really cool. Like I think from North Carolina, maybe, or Georgia probably. And so the PR guy reached out. So Mike Connell's coming on from the Connells. So I don't want to reveal any more, but I'm really happy. Like I was looking at my calendar at the beginning of, you know, this year, what we got scheduled already. And I thought to myself, I felt good because more interviews are booked and maybe a little more well-known players are booked. And I hate to use that as a barometer, but it is a barometer for the popularity of the show. And I'm happy that more people are getting out there. And I'm happy that, you know, whatever I'm doing is touching a few more people. So that's a good question. Thank you. And have a good Christmas. Aren't we having the greatest weather in Tampa ever? Right. So, okay. What's something I like about myself, Gary Wheeler? You know, I think about that a lot, not a lot, but, you know, as I ask these questions, I actually have, you know, probably not a lot, but there's a bunch of things I like about myself, but probably one of the most important things that I like about myself is I'm pretty straightforward. Like if I tell you A, it's A. If I say yes, it'll be done. If I say no, it's definitely not going to be done. And I'm never going to tell you no when I mean yes. I'm never going to tell you yes when I mean no. And I'm pretty straightforward. I'm sincere. Who I am is who I am. I'm not trying to be anybody else. I have flaws. You know, and I'm comfortable with that. I've always been pretty comfortable with that. I've never tried to be anybody else, no matter where I was in life or, you know, business wise, what's going on, good or bad. So that's what I like most about myself, though. What you see is what you get. And if I say something, you could take that to the bank. So thanks for asking, Gary. Happy holidays. Favorite. Okay. Which guitars I play the most? It was the 335, but I tell you what, that Eastman there, it's basically like a Les Paul Special. And I got it because I bought a Les Paul Special. And honestly, the quality control on that was just so bad. It was horrible, but I love the P90 pickups. So a bunch of guitarists that I had on the show had casually mentioned Eastman's over time. And I have a guy that I became friends with, Eddie Martinez. By the way, if you've never watched that interview, watch it. It's probably a couple of years old. Eddie's a guy, grew up in the Bronx like me. And we always have this, it's a New York thing. When you grew up in the 70s in New York, it was really like survival of the fittest. So we connected pretty much right away. He lives out in Oregon now, but he put out an album, I think 2 years ago, called Akosu. Just look up Eddie Martinez. It's like Akosu. It's an African name, but of the record. Anyway, he's an amazing singer, songwriter, and guitar player. And he was really successful and really hot in New York City scene and sessions. But Eddie said, Craig, you ought to check out those Eastmans. So I start looking up the Eastmans, and basically, and you know, you got to take reviews sometimes with a grain of salt, but it was pretty consistent. Everybody said they're like a Gibson Custom, but they don't cost what a Gibson Custom. And I love that guitar. I love the Lawler pickups. In fact, what I like to do next year is, or sometime in the future, is buy a 330, basically a semi hollow a semi-hollow body guitar with those Lawler pickups. And I think Heritage makes one. I think Eastman may make one too, but there's a wrinkle to it. I forget. Maybe it's all hollow, or I don't know. But Eastman guitars, I've loved that guitar. It's great. I'm really thrilled. Okay, that was a standout. Thank you very much. Oh yeah. Okay, Cass or John. I don't know. I'm talking to him. Sorry, but yeah, that's the one your son mentioned. It was a great interview, and he's a lovely guy. We've spoken. Sometimes, I don't follow up with everybody, but sometimes you have chemistry. Sometimes it's more chemistry than others. But Joel's one of the guys I've stayed in touch with, and I would probably stay in touch with him over time. He's a lovely guy. I'm really glad you enjoyed that. David Busby, what's up, my man? Hey, thank you for buying some merch from us early on too. That was really kind of you. John Sykes, he's on my list. I really haven't had to tell you the truth. He's off the rate. Let me make a note here. Sykes is off the grid. It's really hard to get a hold of him. I love his guitar playing. And I know a guy who could probably get me to him. So let me just make a note here. John Sykes. This guy will get me to him. I'll just write down his name before I forget. If I don't write stuff down, it goes in. I'm too much to manage. So I'd love to have John Sykes on the show. I sold a Vox. Teddy Kumpel, gotta be. I sold a Vox bass to Norm. Please ask him how it was doing. I will ask him that, Teddy. That's so funny. Beth's version of Black Coffee with Joby. Yeah, I know, man. That's a really good version for sure. Thanks, David. Following the show since the beginning, and I appreciate it very much, man. Let me tell you, when I was putting this show together, I remember I was listening to some interviews, and I was listening to an interview with the guys who did put Airbnb together, and something stuck in my head that they said you build your community one person at a time, and that really made a big impression on me. And that's why even to this day I still try to answer everybody's posts on YouTube, to the extent I can. I do a pretty good job of that, because I appreciate, listen, there's a lot of things you could listen to. You're choosing to listen to me. I thank you, so thanks everybody for all your support. A great list of guests. Sorry, this is scrolling up. A great list of guests in the new year. By the way, my real name is Greg. My other nickname is G Fretless. There you go. Tampa weather. Yeah, man. All the best to you too. I know I like feel so lucky to be living here this time of year. It's just a pleasure, man. To wake up in the morning, it's got a tiny little bit of chill, and in the afternoon you wear shorts again. It's awesome. VOM Red. Padar Shohad. I'm sorry, I don't know what that means, but thank you. Greetings from IKEA land. Yeah, man. Steve Farris and Peter Stroud episodes. Were they both this year? Yes. Yes, they were both this year. And they were, Stroud was interesting because I had tried to get a hold of Peter, as I did with Audley Freed quite some time ago. And with Peter, if I remember right, he just wasn't interested. And that happens because, look, nobody, if someone doesn't know me, and I'm just another guy trying to get an interview with them, and I totally get it. And I'm not pushy too. And someone says, no, I'm not interested, I'm like, hey, no problem. Thank you for your time. Doors open if something changes moving forward. I'm never, ever pushy. I hate pushy people, and you have the right to do whatever you want. I'm not curing cancer here. We're just having fun on a show. But Jeff Carlisi from 38 Special, which is another great interview I did this year. And he is a lovely, lovely guy. And he's another guy. We stay in touch regular. He is just a sweetheart of a kind human being. And Sage Bernardo, thank you. Sorry, this guy told me he was gonna be on the live stream here to listen, but he had to take a shower. I said, man, if you were really committed, you'd be watching in the shower. And he said he wanted to keep the ladies' attention on me instead of him. Bravo. That was a good one. So all of a sudden, Jeff said, he goes, hey, man, you want to have Peter Stroud? I said, yeah, but I don't think he wants to come. And sure enough, many times, hundreds of times, it's just a question of who's the person that makes the connection for you. And like anything else, that opens up the doors, so I was grateful to Jeff for hooking me up with Peter. He's such a good player. And then I met Peter and Audley when Cheryl came down here. Just incredible show. And both those guys are really cool. Unfortunately, they had a mask. We couldn't hang out that much because their management had, masks on, because there's a bunch of people. And if one of them gets COVID, the whole tour has to maybe get canceled. So we couldn't really hang out, but I got to see him for a few minutes. So, and Steve Farris, he was a lot of people had requested him. I don't know how I got a hold of him. I think I might have just reached out to him, and I'm fortunate. I've had a lot of good guests. So if I sort of include some of the names, it legitimizes the show a little bit, and people are more willing to take a shot, and sometimes they'll listen and whatever. So, but thank you for listening. I appreciate that. Teddy K, who is Sykes? There's only one guy who's going to ask questions. John DeFaria, my man. Let me tell you, this guy, John DeFaria, right here. We have a project coming out that we're going to work with people. We've put a program together called Music Licensing Profits, where we're teaching musicians who are interested in getting their compositions licensed in commercials, TV, Netflix, anything like that. And John is a brilliant guy. He's been in licensing for 20 years, over 20 years. He's had close to 9,000 tracks licensed, and we really worked hard to put a great program together. And you can expect that to roll out in the next 30 to 60, probably closer to 60 days, because we have some beta testing to do on it, but it's a great program. So if you're interested in that, what I would do is go to the Facebook page. There's a Music Licensing Profits Facebook page. Go like that page, and you could say if you want to chat with us, that's fine. But John's a brilliant guy, lovely guy. We met at NAMM. He's a really good guy. He's been a great person to work with. We've had a lot of fun too putting the program together. So everybody look forward to that. Thanks for listening, John. Sykes doesn't really. I Taylor, I thank you. I don't know. I haven't seen him, but I'm gonna listen. I'll make an inquiry, because a lot of people have request. Okay, so thank you, Taylor. G Fretless. Here's the deal, man. You're the third person in 3 days to mention Matteo. He's the guy plays without a pick. Is an Italian guy. So let me write this down. Literally the third person in 3 days. So when that happens, that's the message to me to get an individual on the show, Matteo Mancuso. So I'm going to work on that after the new year comes. Buska Groove, I know you leave me some nice YouTube comments, man. How you doing? Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on the show. Great show, and Happy New Year, Birmingham, Alabama. Yeah, man. I had some great guests from Alabama on the show. I had Ricky Hirsch, the Muscle Shoals guys, Kelvin Holly, and Will. God, this is embarrassing. This is the only problem. You had 850 plus guests. Why can't I remember Will's name? This is embarrassing. I'm going to just look it up, because I love Will. He's a great guy, and he deserves better than my memory can give him. Will McFarlane, a great interview. That, if you want to go back and listen to a great interview, Will McFarlane, that was a pretty intense story. I've had some great guys from Alabama, and thank you for listening. Steve, let's see, both David Wilcox in one interview with Slay, Canadian and American. All right. Okay. What about Brian Downey of Thin Lizzy? You know what, man? I haven't. Let me look into him. Brian Downey. Thanks. I will check him out. I had from Thin Lizzy, the later day Thin Lizzy was Ricky Warwick. And let me see what I could do and get him. I know Randy Bachman, High Stat. I would love to have Randy Bachman. I reached out to him a long time ago. It was hard to get a hold of him, but he's another guy I want to get a hold of, because he's one of my heroes, man. That guy just, from way back when he was with the Guess Who. So that's a good one. Let's see. Ty Tabor. Yeah, that was actually the most popular interview we did until Ian Pace. And then Ian's interview, like 70,000 views. It just blew up. I mean, Ty's was we had 30,000 views on that in a month. It's really interesting to me, because I never know like what's going to be. I have no expectations about anything, because I just don't, because you don't know. And Ty Tabor's blew up. Joel's has done really well, blew up. Joel Wilkins recently. And Ian Pace, which was one of my favorite interviews, simply because I am so in awe of the guy. He's been like one of my favorite drummers since I was probably, 7, right? So a little over 50 years. And one thing with Ian, I hated to do that. I said, Ian, I'm really sorry, but I have to tell you, I feel like I'm 15 years old talking to you. And he says to me, he goes, Craig, don't worry. I know how you feel, because when I'm on stage, I feel like I'm 15 too. And I was like, wow, that was such a nice, kind way to handle my little, fanboy kind of thing there. And I'm usually not like that, but I was like, holy shit, this is Ian Pace. So I was pretty blown away. Wes Boca. Yeah, man, we got the we're kicking it with the weather, effort and passion. Thank you so much, man. I really enjoyed doing the show, and I'm glad that comes across, because this has probably been the most exciting and fun thing I've ever done, professionally, if you want to call it professionally or whatever. But thank you. Havona. Yeah, I'll check it out, Tilly. Rex Snelly, blessings to you, man. Steve Pfister, what's up, man? Good to hear from you. This guy, Steve Pfister, he's a guy out in California. Check out his interviews. Good. Steve, you are so sweet. You're always like so supportive and like on social media and stuff, man. And I really appreciate you for that. And I hope you guys have a great holiday and a great 2022. There goes my cat. Like, he's always here when I'm doing an interview. I'm talking. When the record sign goes on, it's like my cat knows to come here and meow as loud as he can. But Steve, I hope to see you again, maybe at NAMM next year. So it was really nice when we got to connect. Too bad we didn't get to hang out long enough, but thank you. Uwe. Yeah, Scott Gorham, I've tried. I don't think he does those kind of interviews. Believe me, I've really tried hard to get Scott Gorham and Downey as well, and it's just been hard. Eric Johnson, I spoke with Eric, and he's just more of a quiet guy, and I don't think this format is something that he would enjoy. I did speak to him on the phone for a bit, so he was very nice. But Tony Levin, I have not talked to Tony Levin, and I don't know who Marcus Reuter is. So maybe if you want to email me, Craig at Everyone Loves Guitar, I'd be interested in those. There he goes. I just got an email from you. Let's see here. Mike Wanchik. Yeah. I really liked that interview as well with Mike. I had some good chemistry with him. We were kind of similar in he was very direct, and he had a high level of energy. Two old guys that basically go to the gym, take care of themselves, have high energy levels. So we had some fundamentals in process, but I liked his energy, man. He was really good to talk with, and he was very direct. He didn't pull any punches. And the other thing I liked about him, his note, as most of the most successful people, he had no ego at all. None, zero. Totally cool, regular guy, didn't pretend to be anything. And I'll tell you, again, most of the people that are really successful, like Satriani is one of the most humble guys I've ever met. I mean, he is just such a sweet human being. I was really lucky to talk with him. So, and thank you for listening, Taylor. Ola Stanberg. Yeah, I was going to connect with them, and I don't know what happened. I have their info. I have to look back into it. Looking forward to 2022. Me too, man. I'm just I can't believe this is working and I got this functional. I'm not like a tech guy, but so I'm less like, Steve Warner, I had on the show. You go back, there's not a video of that, but Steve Warner, and it was a very good interview. In fact, I'll tell you an interesting story about that. There's no way I could know every genre or every person that I interview. It's just not possible. And country is probably one of my weakest. Country and like bop jazz are probably my weakest genres, just because I've never, like, I grew up in the Bronx. I don't even think they allowed the country radio station there, to be honest with you. And I just was never a jazz guy. Was never turned on to it. I just wasn't my milieu. Anyway, so this is interesting. So when I have the guys from those genres on, I really have to work very hard, and I am limited. I can't ask them about the big hit that they played on because I don't know it. If the information's readily available. The other thing is, when I see like, oh, here's the big hit everybody talks about, I don't like asking those questions because everybody's asking people about those questions. And I don't want to be another person because people, to be honest, people hate that. They're flat. They're thrilled to have had something that has resonated with so many people, but to talk about it over and over again, not so much. And I know this because I get a lot of feedback from my guests. They're like, thank you for not asking me about this. Thank you for not asking me what other people ask. So it's just not my nature to, I'm a bit of a maverick. So it's not my nature to sort of like do what everybody else is doing. In fact, if everybody else is doing it, I'm not going to do it just on that principle. Nothing to do with ego. It's just not my thing. So Warner, somebody leaves a comment on YouTube. I'm pretty sure it was Warner. I can't believe that interviewer is such an idiot. He'd never even asked Steve about something that Steve did. And I never engage with people if they're like, you have the right not to like this show. That's fine. You know, that's your right. And it's fine. Cool. And if you don't like me, I mean, that's fine. Cool too. You have that right. So I'm not going to engage with people and say, well, why'd you call me an idiot? You know, from his perspective or her perspective, I was an idiot because I didn't ask about something that was very overt. But I did like a little test. My wife is a very sweet woman, and you know, she's one of those like kill people with kindness. And I don't usually have the time to follow up with stuff, especially negative. So like 2 or 3 days later, though, I went to that person and I said, hey, thank you very much for listening to the interview. And you're right. I didn't ask this question because it's a weak genre of mine. I said, if you look how many people I've interviewed, and this is back, there's probably 200 people or 150 people. I said, but I was doing 5 interviews a week. I said, or like 4 interviews a week, something like that. I said, there's just no way I could know all these people. So I'm sorry that I disappointed you, but thank you very much for listening and giving us a shot. Do you know that like 3 days later, or maybe even the next day, the individual leaves and goes, you know what? I'm really sorry. I never should have said that. I know how many people you interview, and you're right. It is ridiculous for me to assume that. So I was like, yeah, that was like a win for both of us. And I was just so happy that it worked out like that. Now I've never gone and done that again because I again, you have the right not to listen. It was just an experiment, and you know, it was one of those, you know, happy accidents that worked out. And it was a Steve Warner interview. Let's see. Trevor Rabin. Yeah, man. I think he's off the grid. I've looked into getting him, Rex, actually. Yeah, Tony Levin, I know who he is. I don't know who. Okay, Marcus is another. Okay, I have to check him out. Yeah, I had Robert Fripp sent me a very funny. I got connected with him, and he sent me a very funny "No, I'm not interested" email. It was like, "Thank you very much." It was just a funny, like, sort of like something like, "Thanks for your interest. Absolutely not interested." Something like that. It was like, it was one of those notes that you'd think, why did you bother responding? But it was, I said, thank you for responding. You know, what am I going to do? Not everybody's going to be interested. That's cool. Let's see here. Oh, Rick Emmett. Yeah. Thanks, Rob. I loved to talk. Rick was one of my guitar heroes growing up. And the last interview we did with him this year, if you haven't seen that, check it out. It was really emotional because he put a book of poetry together. He's been writing poetry for a number of years, and he got a publishing opportunity to put this book together. And this is a perfect example why I don't do things that everybody else is doing. When I said, hey man, can you send me your book? Because I want to read some of your poems and talk about them. And the PR people or whatever, they sent me a thing that they had put together, and it had, you know, some X number of poems. And I said to Rick, I say, hey Rick, I don't want to be difficult, but everybody you're interviewing you is getting these, you know, 12 poems. I don't want to ask you the same questions. That means the questions are going to be limited to these 12 poems. Can you please send me the book? Because I'd like to go through it. And I did. And there were a couple of poems in there I noticed about his brother. He lost his brother to cancer, but I had no idea how, look, cancer's never a good thing, but it's pretty brutal the way it takes people in many occasions. And this was one of those occasions. And, you know, he was teary-eyed quite a bit. And, you know, when someone is like that and kind enough to share that with me, I feel like very honored and flat. It's like a gift of kindness that someone has shared with me. So if you like the 2020 interview, Rob, check out the one from this year. It was really intense. And I think I have the original one on the back end of that too. Thank you, Rex. Thank you, man. I've got I've got great energy and conversational intelligence. You've got great instincts. We trust it. Always fun to listen. Thank you so much. That what I really appreciate that, because that conversation was probably one of my weakest things ever growing up, and I had to work really hard on a lot of head stuff to get comfortable enough to to speak. And honestly, writing ad copy for this many years was a big help, because you had to have a conversation with people and you had to be crystal clear, and that taught me a lot. And I think trying to listen, and I'd rather listen than talk. You know, I want to listen to people because then I can get, you know, from a selfish standpoint, I can get something out of it when I'm listening. When I'm talking, I can't really get something out of that, you know. So thanks very much. I appreciate it. And you know, blessings to you, and I hope you have a great holiday season, man. And Rex Schnelly, check out his new record as well. SCHNELLE. High Stat. You know what? High Stat. Thornley was one of my favorite interviews too. Yeah, that was the number one comment on Thornley about his exhaling. It was really funny. That was quite like 60 to 70% of all the comments from on that interview had to do with his exhaling. I really enjoyed that interview too. Thank you very much. Because I got the sense he may be typically a little more close to the vest, and he opened up. Same thing with, I don't know if you ever heard David Grissom's interview. It's a little older at this point, but David tends to be closer to the vest, and he really opened up, and it was a great interview. And I met him at NAMM I only went to one NAMM in California. It was right before COVID hit, and I bumped into him there. It was really funny because it was him, and he was sitting across from, this is John, it's embarrassing, Bon Jovi's guitar player, the producer. This is John Shanks. And I ran into Dave, and you know, the nice thing about having guests on the show is when I do meet them in person, it's not like, oh, how are you? You shake each other's hand. It's almost like, it's a really nice thing. It's almost like you're buddies, but you haven't seen each other in 5 years. So you like give each other a hug. And Grissom's a big, tall guy. I'm not. I'm like 5'9", and everybody thinks I'm taller for something. First thing that people, when they meet me, I thought you were taller. Everybody, since I'm a young kid, I don't know why. But Grissom's a big, tall guy. We gave each other a hug, and it was just really nice to see him. So that's a great interview if you hadn't heard him. The first interview I did with Grissom. England, Josephine Juniper, Paul Kossoff. Yeah, man, I love Paul. I had Simon Kirk on. I don't know if you know that. That was a really good interview. He was a lovely guy as well. And my wife's from England. You know, some of you might know that. England's been very, very good to me. So right on. And I know it's cold over there because my mother-in-law was just telling us. Is there any chance you can get future guests to demonstrate riffs and techniques? You know, the straight answer of that is, that's just not this show. That's not what we, and most of my guests, or many of them, have videos where they're showing that. And the other thing is, so it's a 3-part answer. They are so happy to not, when your whole identity is wrapped up in an instrument, and all of a sudden someone wants to know who you are outside of that instrument, it seems like that's a big refreshing thing for most people. And they're so happy to not talk about, you know, well, I tuned down half a step and I came up with that riff. Well, you know, I've asked people how they come up with certain riffs, but to do demos, it's just not the show. And I hope you understand that, and I hope it makes sense, Taylor. Man, I had Al Di Meola on the show. That was one of the best. In fact, let me tell you something interesting. I just got these statistics the other day. So that's a great interview, man. Because Al was so open. Funny story about the Di Meola interview. So let me go. The most popular interviews this year, and again, I never know what's going to be the most popular or not, was Danny Korchmar. Danny's been a long time. Anybody that's like a baby boomer has heard Danny Korchmar. That was the number 1 interview of the year. Al Di Meola was number 2. And Keith Nelson was number 3 of for the ones that we did this year. And I'll tell you a funny story about Al. So I'm prepping for Al's interview, and part of my prep sometimes is to watch existing interviews. So I'm watching these interviews of DiMeola, and I got to tell you, he's not smiling in any of them. He's not laughing in any of them. He's pretty freaking serious. And I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, that's like not me. I like to laugh. I like to have fun, and I'm, sweating a little bit. And we do the first interview, and he's like so open. And I'm like, holy crap. And we ran out of time, and I didn't know, I said, Al, hey, I'd love to finish this and do the next part. He goes, yeah, sure. Now look, COVID was probably played a role here because, people, as soon as COVID came, the length of the interviews like went by 30 to 45 minutes, which I'm very grateful for. But when you don't have a lot of things to do and you're having a pleasant conversation, it's not a push to have the second part of it, right? But that interview went great. So check out Al DiMeola's interview. You haven't seen it. It's really good. He talked about a lot of heavy stuff there. I mean, he talked about, basically, he said that, understand why he's so intense and he's not laughing a lot. He's a guy who's driven to be just the most brilliant guitar player possible. And he also suffers from depression. So when you have someone that's got the weight of, the bar of accomplishment, it's never coming. No matter how close he gets, the bar continues to move up, which makes it impossible for any individual that's in that situation to ever be content. So when you have that going on, plus you have suffering from depression, it's hard to be laughing and jovial. But I tell you, man, he was absolutely great. He was a joy to have on the show. It was really cool. Let's see here. Yeah, Dixon, creative. Thank you very much, man. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Guthrie Trapp, Keith Gaddis, Al Anderson, Scott Ligon, and that's okay. Scott Ligon is the current guitarist. Okay, some of those guys are on deck and on my list. I've got a massive list of players, and some of them are. But let me just make a note here of the ones that aren't. And thank you, I appreciate that. Thanks a bunch, and thanks for listening. Warner Hodges, yeah, man, that was a really, really. I really enjoyed him. He was a lovely person, man. He was a superstar, first class human being. Everything about him was classy. I really enjoyed talking to Warner Hodges. He's great. Oh, is Bonham here in Florida? Okay, you know what? I'm gonna see. I can get to Jason. Thank you, because he's a guy I'd like to talk with. Because he's gonna be another guy. Everybody talks to him about his dad. I wouldn't talk to him about his dad. I'd ask him one question about his dad. That's it. And I'm sure he's sick of hearing that. I mean, I would be, let's see, Jason Bonham, Simon. Oh, you saw that, Josephine. Great. Cool. Okay. Yeah, he was 17. I think he was 17, Teddy. He talked about that the first album. He did his first concert. He talked about it. He dropped acid on at the first concert. I mean, the shit that he revealed was like, I couldn't believe it, man. I was really like blown away. I was really flattered. Larry Crane. Yeah, somebody else mentioned that. So let me write that down. Thank you very much, Taylor. Oh, that's okay, man. There's no, even if you weren't new to the channel, it's impossible to keep up. I can't even keep up with all the interviews. It's embarrassing. Sometimes I forget who's been on my show, and they'll say, "Did you have so-and-so?" And I know the name, but I can't put it with the face. It's just, for me, it's just because I've had a lot of guests on, and like, I've got a really good memory, but this has been overwhelming even for me. Let's see. Michael Lee Firkins, I was supposed to connect with him, and I wanted to have him on the show, and I never heard from the guy. There is a feud with Family Man. Oh, I don't know anything about that. Yeah, Martin Chambers is somebody I want to have on, actually. Something happened. I think I had gotten wired into him. I wasn't sure. Yeah, I'd love to interview Paul too. He wasn't interested. I'd love to have Paul on the show. He's one of my all-time favorite singers. He's got a great voice. I mean, just incredible. Really good. Let's see what else I wanted to go through. Hey, nobody. Only one person answered the question. I want to know what's the most important thing that you learned this year. Somebody give me some good stuff here, man, because I want to learn something from what you learned. Okay, some other cool interviews I had this year. I had a guy on the show called Al Lubrano. He's a best-selling author, and the reason that it was so good. His name of his book is Blue Collar Roots, White Collar Dreams. And the reason I was so happy to talk with Al was that book meant a lot to me, because the book talks about, you know, he grew up in Brooklyn. His dad was a carpenter. I grew up in the Bronx. My dad didn't have a profession really. And the book is about when you grow up in this blue collar background and you somehow through education or training break into this white collar world, you never fit, because the people that are born, most white collar people, they don't really accept you. And then what happens is the blue collar people, the environment you're leaving, they no longer accept you, because the perception is you think you're better than them, which is not true. It's more like, holy shit, how did I get here? Not that I'm better than you, but so that was a great, and he had a tough life. You know, he's had a divorce, and he had a couple of forms of cancer come back a couple of times. That was a pretty amazing story. I mean, it was I had another interview this year with a guy named Joe Bataan, Bataan, and that was pretty memorable because, again, growing up in New York, he founded this kind of like Latin soul music, and he's like the OG of that genre. And to get him on, it was really funny. Sometimes how things work out. I go to his Facebook, Joe Bataan, and there's a guy I went to high school with I'm friends with on Facebook, that's friends with him. Now, this guy I went to high school with is a singer. So his name is Joe Rodriguez. I reach out to Joe and I say, hey, Joe, I'm trying to get a hold of Joe Bataan. I'd like to interview him on my show. And I see you're friends with him. Can you give me an intro? He goes, yeah, I sing in his band. I'm like, holy shit. I mean, it's just amazing sometimes how things work out, or at least how they've worked out for me in this show. I'm like, gratitude, I can't tell you, man. So that worked out. That was a good interview. Paul Rogers, yeah. Scott Henderson, he's on the list. Yeah, Ty Tabor, he's old school, man. Martin Miller was on the show, and Andy Wood was a long time ago as well. Martin Miller was on this year. Really good interview. Very, very good interview. I really enjoyed talking with him. And Andy Wood was on a long time ago, like in 2017. Yes, it's the Bukowski pick on the wall. Teddy K. Teddy Kumpel, man, he's a great, if you guys don't know Teddy Kumpel's music, look him up. He's a really brilliant. And his interview was great. We did that like probably 3 years ago, but that was a pretty intense interview, man. That was a very intense interview. And Teddy may be the one or two guests I've had on the show that had a more difficult childhood than I did. Music finds one another. Yeah, it's been really cool, Josephine. It really has. Your name is so British, Josephine Juniper. I don't know if that's your real name or just your YouTube name, but Teddy K. Oh, it's not Teddy Kumpel. Okay, there's a guy, Teddy Kumpel. Sorry, I thought you might have been Teddy Kumpel. Teddy K. There's a guy interviewed, Teddy Kumpel, musician out of Brooklyn. I thought you were him. Sorry. Teddy is not a common name, so I was like, thinking, oh, who would it be besides Teddy? But thank you for listening. All right, so let me get last time. What's the most important thing you guys learned this year? Let's get some good dialogue going. Anybody? All right, so I think we're going to wrap up. This was really cool. A couple of things I'd like to know. Oh, thank you, man. Thank you. You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it, Teddy. So a couple of things I want to know. I plan on doing more of these. I'm maybe even thinking of doing one of these a week, like every Fred Tackett, Little Feet. I will look into that. I don't know Fred, so let me see if I can find how I can connect with him. So I plan on doing more of these. I'm thinking of maybe even doing one of the week, like every Thursday around this same time. I'd love to know a couple of things. Number one, is that something that is interesting? I don't know that I can entertain enough to do that, but I'd certainly like to. Also, let me know what kind of questions or topics you'd like me to address on these live streams, whether it's musical, life challenges, interview stuff. I'm open to talking about pretty much anything. And I would just love to get your feedback on any way that I could make these better or more interesting for you or more engaging. Change is the hallmark of progress. Yeah, man, I have learned that too. I always tell my son that. I was talking about that, my younger son, about that last night. Wow, now we're getting some great questions. Great. Yeah, I learned to be a bit stronger. Good for you. That's awesome. That's a hard one to learn too. That's awesome, Josephine. Wolfie Van Halen. Yeah, I'd like to have Wolfie on the show. If anybody listening can get me to Wolfie, that would be great. I have to get a known contact into him because everybody's bothering that guy. That poor guy just lost his dad, and they're bothering him for the wrong reasons. So I wouldn't want to. I'd rather come recommended so he doesn't think I'm like one of those guys. Thanks, Rob. You rock, man. Thank you very much. I appreciate you listening. Thank you, man. That was very kind of you. Yeah, thank you, Josephine. So yeah, let me know if you'd like me to do more of these. Like I said, I'm thinking about doing one of these a week or maybe two of these a month. Let me know what kind of questions you'd like or topics you'd like me to address, and I am open to doing anything. There are people on here that I have acknowledged, and there are people on here that I haven't. I just want to say a sincere thanks to every single person for listening to this show. I realize that when you wake up in the morning, you got a lot of choices to make. And the fact that you choose to connect with me on some level means a lot. It's really thoughtful. It doesn't go unappreciated or taken for granted ever. And so thanks very much for all your support. And thank you for listening. And, just let me know. Okay. Regular opportunity. Good. Thanks, Philip. That's cool. In one's attitude, not one's aptitude. It is one's attitude, not one's aptitude, that determines one's altitude. Yeah, man, that's great. That is great. That is really great. Thanks. Thank you. Buska Grew. I love all these names that people have on their YouTube identities. Uwe, I know you want Dan Huff. I've tried, man. That's all I can tell you. I've gone to the wall. Sometimes I fail. It just didn't work. Let's see. Thank you. The benefit of making music every day, playing guitar and bass again daily. Yeah, man. That's for sure, man. Having some outlet is so important. For me, it's working out and playing music. And for most of my guests, playing music is some part, or most of my listeners as well. Obviously, some making music is some part of that as well. I'm like every parent who's ever asked, what'd you learn at school today? Yes, like every dysfunctional parent. I'm like, for sure. Yeah, well, I just, I like to find out what's going on, because again, I think we can all learn from sharing those kinds of experiences. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I really thank everybody. Again, it seems like, people want to do more of these. We'll do more of these. I would say at least twice a month, to start with. And if it keeps going better, I have no problem doing these once a week. And let me know what kinds of questions or topics you'd like me to address. And you can always contact me. Best thing to do is go to the website and go to the contact form. I think it's at everyonelovesguitar.com/hello. Or you could email me, Craig at everyonelovesguitar.com. The first one, I'll definitely get it more than the second, because they flag a lot of stuff for spam. Uwe, thank you, man. Thanks very much for Steve. You're the one who recommended Steve, or you were the one who, Uwe Wright is a brilliant guitarist, Telecaster player out of Germany. And he also has a hand in the banking system out there, if I'm not mistaken. He was the one who was strong. He's been a listener like almost since day one, and he asked for Steve Farris, and that was a good one. Thank you very much. Shit happens. I like that, man. Thanks very much. Happy New Year to you too, everybody. I love your approach with all the interviews, and the content is deep and meaningful. Thanks again. Happy New Year. Thank you very much, and Happy New Year to you. It's RD Mikey Toey. RD Mikey Road Mikey Toey. I don't know, but thank you very much, and Happy New Year to you as well. Happy New Year, Buska Groove. And on that note, I'm going to jump. Everybody take care. Have a wonderful New Year. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for hanging out with me. We're going to do this again in probably 2 weeks. Next week, I'm going to take a little break from New Year's. And again, if those of you who are interested in checking out the program we have soon on music licensing, go to the Music Licensing Profits fan page on Facebook and like that page, or the announcements will be coming there. Peace and love to everybody. Thank you for listening. There you go. And I will talk to you soon. Thanks.